Hi guys, Andy N, spoken label, back in the house. I know it's a Wednesday evening, but it's not. It's a Tuesday evening. My week's going just days seem to go into one at the moment for a few reasons. But anyway, we have a fantastic writer with us today and a gamer as well, in a way, I guess, as well. Because but anyway, we'll come on to that a bit now. I've got the wonderful Katy Naylor with me. I met Katy on a Zoom spoken word night last week because I tuned in to go to listen to another friend, spoken label, who we won't reveal. And Katy came on and read out a short piece, a flash fiction piece, and she was brilliant. Probably my favourite open micer on that night she was. So we got her on this week. So now Katie's currently based in the Shoreham area, but you're not originally from there, Katy, are you? So tell us a little bit about yourself as a person, where you're from originally, and then where all your creativity came from.
That's fine. All right. Hello, Andy. I'm Katy. I have been all over the place actually. So I was born and brought up near Watford, which is just outside London, little suburb just northwest. Um, Grew up there, fairly uneventful and suburban type childhood. I went to Oxford for university
Mm.
and St Catherine's College. And I interestingly, I didn't really get into writing at that point. I studied English
Mm.
and I ended up doing essentially medieval studies, which kind of is something that
Oh,
ended up being the basis for a lot of my work. So that's like Anglo-Saxon literature, so Beowulf and that kind of thing.
right.
Middle English, Old Norse. Yeah.
That explains why in your first book then,
And
but we'll come on to that in a bit, okay? Yeah, so
Yeah, exactly. So that, even though at the time I wasn't writing, that is something which obviously made a big impression on me and is something that has come out as I started writing later.
hmm.
Um, as I say, when I was at uni, I did a lot of theatre, little backstage stuff. I did a lot of historical reenactment as well. So that's basically where you dress up
Ooh.
as a Viking and hit people with swords.
On a
So that
different
was
note,
what a lot of my 20s was spent doing.
I'll just tell you out
Yeah.
of curiosity, actually, it's really bizarre this because this is slightly off the point, but you'll find it interesting. Was my wife's family have just done my heritage DNA kit thing they have, and they taught me in a Mandarin having a go in it, and mine's just come back last night, and Mandarin hasn't yet, and I found out I'm 19% Scandinavian. So it's like we didn't have no inkling of
Oh.
that. But I know what I know why, because dad's side of his family came up from West Scotland and that got
Yes.
raided by the Vikings.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Well, my husband's actually from the Wirral,
Oh yeah.
so just outside Liverpool, and there's a huge Viking influence there, even in some of the place names and stuff, because it was a part of the country where it became the Danelaw. It's actually where the Vikings settled, and a lot of people there made it their home. Now, I could go on about this all night, but what's so interesting is that actually parts of the English language have been very strongly influenced by that Viking connection. People don't often realise. So things like whole sets of pronouns that we use, they all came from the Scandi. So anyway, it's
Oh,
fascinating.
right,
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
It's fascinating. Now, obviously, I want people to realise, obviously, because you've done a bit of travelling, haven't you? You were telling me before, obviously, you and your husband worked in London at one point, didn't you? But then you moved to Australia, didn't you? So,
Yeah, that's right. So we worked in London, lived in London for a few years. When we got married, moved back to near where I grew up. And we were finding London life not particularly satisfying. And we actually went out to Melbourne for a couple of years. I've got family out there. We wanted to get to know the extended family. We had a daughter who we thought at the time was going to be an only child, and we wanted her to grow up around cousins and that sort of thing. Our son came along shortly afterwards, so that proved to be wrong. So we had a couple of years in Melbourne, and then when we decided to come back, we thought, well, this is our opportunity to choose the life that we want to live. And actually, since I've been living in Shoreham, that's when my creativity has really had a chance to flourish. I find being by the sea is incredibly um, soothing and inspiring. So I write a lot about the sea, but also I find there's a certain almost dissociative state that I need to get into to write successfully, and just the calm of being able to go for a walk by the sea. And so over the pandemic, it kicked something into touch, and the floodgates opened.
muted myself then. Typical, people are wondering why I went quiet. I had a coughing fit. But yeah, I noticed that because like I said, you had two collections come out in fairly quick succession, haven't you? So now I want to talk about them both of you individually, of course, give them both their own time to breathe. Now, let's get the order right first. Yes, your first book was one that well, this laptop's now gone and frozen on me, which is typical, really. That is it. But I know, yeah, your first book was sorry, people are guessing. Postcard from Ragnarok. Now, tell us about where this book came from, first of all, then. Because I can see this one. Obviously, we're hinting back to you what you were interested in at uni, and there's obviously a big link to that, and then this here.
Absolutely. So Postcards from Ragnarok is essentially a series of retellings of the stories from the Poetic Edda, which is an Old Norse work, a collection of Old Norse mythology, put on paper in, I think, around the 13th century, although some of the material is a lot older than that. And what I was trying to do with that collection was to explore what those concepts and what that mythology might have meant to people at the time, but also what they might mean to us today. So, you think about the Vikings, you think about Beowulf, and sometimes I think they can be quite almost a broadness to how people think about it. They think about it as the first Marvel or the first superhero story, big dudes with hammers smashing at each other. But actually, what I was really interested in doing is to digging more deeply into what those metaphors could actually mean. So, for example, there's the world serpent is a part of the Norse canon. And what that is, it's the Midgard serpent is a giant snake that circles the earth. And I thought, well, of course, again, being by the sea, the Vikings were seafaring people. And when they looked at the horizon, they saw the horizon and they imagined that it was this snake going around the earth. And I thought, an interesting concept when you really dig into that, because that's actually quite terrifying when you think about it. And it kind of encapsulates, that whole threat, that whole sense of threat and that sense of uncertainty. And so, if, for example, I wrote a poem called Midgard that tries to explore that from a modern point of view.
Yeah, it's the extracts I've read of this, or not, or I've actually heard, because clever people go on your website and notice 10 of the poems are actually on there. And they're absolutely brilliant stuff to listen to, really, really engaging on it. Yeah, I heard that straight away. Brilliant. Now, obviously, over what period was this collection wrote? Was this like a lockdown collection wrote then, was it really for you?
Yeah, it was. I mean, my sort of modus operandi, I suppose, is to write these quite tight little collections. So it's only 10 poems long. It's a micro chap,
Yeah.
and I wrote it probably over the course of a couple of months over lockdown. Um, I I can't remember. I think I had an idea for one poem that was slightly different. It was about Gudrun, who is another sort of hero of Norse mythology, who burns her own house down and serves her husband drink in the skulls of her own children, which is pretty gross. And again, I had an
Rather.
idea. Yeah, I had an idea for that, a poem about that, and just linking it to almost, suicidal ideation and how that can feel, the temptation to walk away from it all and let everything burn. And once I'd had that idea, I thought, oh, there's actually a lot of material here that I want to work with. And so then I consciously went back to the stories and looked at what I could do with them and looked at what I could plumb from them, if you like, and it grew from there. It grew from there.
Was it always a conscious decision with this collection to just be 10 poems? Or did that you realise when you were writing it, 10 was the number you were going to settle on?
I definitely wanted to get up to 10. Yeah, 10 felt like a good number. With hindsight, I kind of wish I'd stuck at it for longer and maybe stuck a few more in there for good measure. But at the time, it felt like I'd had quite an intense flurry of inspiration. And I mean, you'll have seen from the work on my website, I'm a little bit all over the place when it comes to projects. So I tend to be able to keep a sustained focus for a short period of time. So 10 poems felt like the right number.
I'm in a similar situation like you, as I said already. I'm all over the place. I'm one of these sort of people who agree that doesn't believe in standing still with creativity. And we'll come on to that in a minute because there's other things we want to talk about you today, Katie, as well. That definitely shows the same as well. That's why I find you really interesting to talk to. But yeah, now obviously then talking about then obviously I want to go into your second collection, which I've read less
Mm.
of, if I'll be honest with you. But it sounded really good. It's a really good book again. It's Stovetop Ghosts, a book of hours. Now,
Ah,
tell us next about that then. Because
okay.
this
So
well, this is a completely different sort of collection altogether.
So Stovetop Ghost is actually a forthcoming book that's coming out in a couple of
Oh,
weeks' time, actually. So
oh.
you've possibly seen some promo for it.
Yeah,
But
well,
the other collection,
Amazon's got it down as 7th of February.
oh, that's interesting. That's very interesting. I'm going to look that up when I'm definitely going to look that up
I know.
when
I
we
see.
get off here.
Spoken label causing confusion. Then, right? So,
Amazing. No, get in on it early. Why not? Ahead of
yeah.
the game.
But
The other little collection I had out was with the beautifully named Bullshit, which is called Girl Mirror Wolf, and that was again another little micro collection that was
mm,
based on, well, kind of digging into some sort of pretty heavy childhood type issues, but again through a lens, and this time in a sort of slightly pseudo Angela Carter kind of way,
I love
digging
Angela
in through the
Carter.
lens of, oh,
Big fan of Angela Carter.
I would
Definitely.
love to be able to cite her as an influence. I should be as good as her one day. But so I was looking at it through the lens of kind of Little Red Riding Hood, and it's about, I won't go into too much detail, but it's about access visits, actually. Divorced parents, access visits every other Saturday, and drawing out that metaphor of Little Red Riding Hood going to have to go to visit the wolf, basically, uh, every other week. And yeah, that one I actually wrote for a specific submissions call um, from a small press. They were looking for growing pains was the theme. I thought, oh, got something I could do there. It didn't actually get in to that particular call, but in the end, I was left with a body of poems, so I thought, well, let's get them out there, and it's been quite well received, so it's nice.
Excellent. No, I didn't know about that one too. It just shows
Oh,
you,
there you
and
go.
that's why. See,
Happy.
you learn something every day. Then, well,
Yeah.
tell us about the collection. Then that's caused you a bit of confusion. Then, Stovetop Ghosts. Then,
Oh, Stovetop Top Goes. Okay, so this one actually came from when I was first writing poetry.
oh yeah.
And I started actually not even writing poems. Like, the reason that my Twitter handle is called Void Scrawl, it's a bit of a funny name, is because
Mm,
I originally had a Twitter account called Void Scream, where I was just over the pandemic just writing little snippets of stuff for nobody. Didn't follow
mm.
anyone, didn't have any followers, just as a little experiment to see how I would do when I screamed into the void. And in the end, I was comfortable enough to then close that account down and start again. And that's why I went for Void Scrawl as a sort of writing account. But anyway, when I was first writing these poems and going back and forth with my friend Judith Kingston, also a very accomplished poet herself, and I was having a conversation with her and realised that all the little snippets and drafts I'd sent her all had titles that were times of day. So, 5 a.m., 3 a.m., 11 a.m. And they were all just coming out as being around the pattern of the day. And then I thought, wouldn't it be interesting? And again, it goes back to the medievalism in me. So a book of hours is actually, for people who don't know, I understand not everyone does know, it is actually a medieval devotional text where
Right,
you have a
right.
little prayer for each of the
Mm.
offices of the day. So at
Ah,
each time of day, there are different prayers, and you'd have different things that you say. So lauds, matins, nones, vespers, etc. And so in the end, I mean, it's a secular work, but then
mm.
I decided to write these poems, incorporate some poems I've previously written, write some new ones to match the pattern of the day. It was all about raising small children and
Ah, right, yeah.
motherhood in particular, and those days that can kind of stretch out forever, and the different emotions and the different things that can happen in the beat of the day, and to tie that into the liturgical hours. So the idea is to make it almost a sort of modern secular set of meditations on
Right, yeah.
on motherhood and the domestic.
It does. It reads almost like, and that's what I like what your work is. It reads like it's by a completely different author. The bits I've
Wow.
read in it, and that's good writing, really. I felt it was
Yeah,
still you, but it was very dish on different side to you. And I'm always a
yeah,
believer in writing. You've got to do that, everything you do. So,
I
well,
agree.
good luck with that one, definitely. If that's you
Thank
didn't
you.
know us out, I've caused some confusion there. But
Oh, that's exciting. That's exciting. I mean, we're hoping to have an in-person launch if anyone's in the Brighton area. Yet to fully confirm the venue, which isn't entirely helpful, but we're hoping in a couple of weeks' time to snag an in-person launch in
good
and
luck.
around Brighton. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Good luck that one, definitely. Now, I've
Thank
got
you.
to ask you a couple of bits and pieces then, obviously, because at first I want to touch on next then, obviously, because I know you've done some games, haven't you? Now, now I want to touch on these just very briefly for very few reasons. We're going to go into a long story in this one, okay? But certainly, like, tell us about these two games that you've done. Then I want to
Yeah,
learn about more about less than the programming side of it. 'Cause people look up, they can see how it's structured. But what
yeah,
made you
sure.
want to do these two stories then? Because this again is very
So
different.
yeah. So something that I've loved for a long time. So I am somebody who has always been terminally online. So back in the late 90s, I was on LiveJournal. I've always kind of hung around blogs and things looking for interesting bits and pieces. And something I discovered, maybe 15 years ago now, is a bunch of writers who wrote stuff at the time in a program called Twine, which is a very simple program that lets you write essentially choose your own text adventures. Now, I'm a massive nerd. I taught myself to program in BASIC when I was a kid, and I
Oh,
always wanted
I
to
did the
write
same.
my own game. Yeah. And so, yes, it was quite exciting. And obviously, when I
Hmm.
read them, I didn't see myself as a writer. I didn't really ever get around to doing anything with it myself. But then during the pandemic, the first writing project I started, which I'm actually still working on now, is a massive, massive game. And it's so something else that I'm really into is immersive and interactive theatre. And there's a
Oh
theatre
yeah.
company. Yes, there's a theatre company called Punch Drunk, and they get warehouses, and they will fill the warehouse with set, and then rather than sitting in your seat and watching the play, you get to wander about and kind of catch the action as it happens around you. Very intricate, very powerful.
Hmm.
And I was really missing over the pandemic. I was really missing live theatre. And this particular theatre show called The Drowned Man from 2013, had a lot of material that had been created by the fan community, essentially recording all the different intersecting stories in the show. And I thought, well, as I can't get out, why don't I try recreating it? So I started, and
Ah.
it's the size of a novel because it's huge and it's in real time. I've got it operating in 4D. And the idea is that I've made it as a game so that it's as if you're in the show. And each scene, you can choose if you're going to follow someone or if you're just going to go and wander. And the game will take you to the right place depending on where you are and what you choose to do. So that was my first kind of dabbling in writing. And so there was an artistic space that I really wanted to be a part of, and I still didn't see myself as a writer at all. But I thought, well, you know what? If I pitch them a game, that's something you don't see a lot of in this world. Yeah, maybe they'll accept that, and they'll maybe overlook the quality of the writing slightly. And they said yes, and so I put something together, and yeah, it was a great springboard. It kind of started everything else rolling really because it forced me to get those words down. So something I like about my Twine adventures is that I like to use them probably because it was originally based on recording an in-person theatrical experience. I
Hmm.
like my games to be explorations of space and explorations of time. So one game um, is an exploration of a fictional town and a kind of story that runs through that. And then the other game I did, which is called Jamboree, is more like the film Rashomon, where
Yes.
you have
Yes.
one story
Hmm.
told from three or four different perspectives, and the story changes depending on whose eyes you're looking for. So I decided I wanted to try playing with that concept. And again, that's something that
Hmm.
you can use Twine to do. So as you play the game, you can jump between the points of view of all these different characters. And they're quite outlandish, but so the points of view are quite different. But if you put them all together, you get a complete sense of the story. But it just depends on what angle you're looking at it from. So it's a bit of a puzzle box, and something that I find really interesting.
Yeah, it was really because I had to go from this afternoon into this evening, and if people wanted to go, they're great fun. But I'll warn you, I got killed pretty quick constantly in them. I'm hopeless in that sort of thing, right?
That's
So
hilarious.
it's
That's
typical me.
hilarious.
It's typical me. So, but anyway, I I'll forward touch on obviously onto your magazine. You did mention before we started recording as well about your publication and your short story that was published in 5 minute booklets or with four of the short stories called Salt by Saltash. Tell us
Saltash.
tell us about that next. I think this was brilliant. This one you told me before.
Ah, so this one, um, it's a kind of a folk horror book, but based around the idea of folk music. So my theme was the apocalypse. It was a writing competition entry that I never ended up making. And I was at a folk gig. I love folk music, and we're really lucky. Near where I live, there's a brilliant folk venue. So I was at a concert. A guy called Seth Lakeman, and he played a jig called Saltash, which is actually a place in Cornwall. And I thought, what a great name, Salt. And I split it. It's all one word, the actual place and the jig. But I split it into two, Salt Ash. And I then decided to create this story that was the actual apocalyptic elements are quite vaguely sketched. Um, but it's based around the structure of Green Grow the Rushes O. So it's in little sections, and each section is named after a line in Green Grow the Rushes O. But really, it's focusing on the effect that this event has on the community and this little group of folk musicians. And what I love about it is that I also created a playlist to go with it, and there's a QR
Ooh.
code in the book. And so then the songs that I mention, and because I quote lines from songs all the way through, because part of it is I think folk music is so flipping weird.
It
There's
can be,
so
yeah.
much
Oh,
stuff.
I love folk. I'm a massive fan of folk music. I am myself.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, it's
yeah.
something I really love deeply. So this story was a real love letter to the whole genre, and yeah, I'm really, really proud of it.
So you should be as well. Definitely great stuff. Now, I want to touch on as Monty Python says, and now for something completely different. We're both old enough to remember that just about. I want to go on to touch on lastly of your stuff is void space. Now, tell us about where the idea for void space came from.
Okay, that leads on really well from what I've already told you. So, as we've said, I have written a couple of sort of story literary games in Twine, and I got them published, but I noticed that there wasn't what I wanted to see was a market for that kind of writing to get spotlighted. I always got the impression, I've seen the odd little choose your own adventure, the odd Twine game get published as an oddity in other lit mags. So I was looking around to see if there was a space, that was dedicated. And I think there was one back in 2015. But it closed, as lit mags often do. And so I thought, oh crikey, okay, this doesn't exist. I'm going to have to make it, aren't I? So, on pretty much of a whim, I guess, or just to kind of have a go and see how it goes, I decided to, yeah, create a space for people who wanted to experiment with interactive writing, particularly to submit their work. So when I say interactive writing, I mean any like a poem or a short story or piece of visual art where the reader or the viewer has some kind of agency beyond just consuming the prose. So whether it's a branching narrative or we've had visual poetry that can go in interesting places. We've had twines, we've had all kinds of different submissions, and it's actually on main issue 6 is coming out on the 15th of April. And
Whoa.
then in between main issues, I'll do pop-ups. And what that is that people like to submit tools for other writers to use. So somebody sent me a blackout poetry generator that they programmed. You feed text in, and then at random, it kind of black spits out, and it makes your own little blackout poem out of it. Someone else wrote for me a sort of series of prompts, but entwined so that follow them in a branching sort of way. And so what I like to do is to take one of those and then make a whole issue around it. So invite writers to submit their own work in response to that interactive piece. And that's a great way of getting writers involved who, don't want to write interactive stuff themselves, but they are then interacting with tools that other writers have made. Yeah, it's a very, very exciting project. We're actually going into print for the first time in June.
Oh, oh,
We're publishing our first print book. It's called Sprawl, and it's by
oh.
Emma Levin. And it started life as an experiment to see what AI art could produce. So Emma started typing in prompts to this generator and seeing if she could make it into something coherent. Now there are issues around AI, and as a result of that, we are being very careful. We're making sure to donate all profits to a charity supporting human artists. And we're being very clear about when the work has been sourced by machine, where it's come from human creativity, just being very transparent about what Emma's doing. But what she's
Yeah,
produced is you just have to be transparent. But I do believe that as a piece of art, it's really valuable in itself. And what we've got,
I would love to see that. I would absolutely love to see that.
it's going to be great.
I'll ask you for Emma's contact details afterwards. I want to get her on here straight away for that.
Oh, bless you.
No, it's
Yeah.
my cup of tea, and I'm not
Amazing.
sure whether I want to bring one here on the paranormal podcast. Might be both yet. We'll touch on that another day. Right?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, so what it's come out with is actually an interactive graphic novel, kind of cyberpunk themed. And it's great. And what I love about it is that it is a choose your own adventure, but it's got a philosophical bent, it's got meat to it. And that's the kind of work that I want to encourage.
Definitely. Well, put me in touch with her. Definitely. I'd love to hear more
We'll
about
do,
that.
we'll do.
Now,
Yeah,
obviously, moving on again, because obviously, like I said, this
yeah,
is a podcast. We're all over the place. Now,
yeah.
when we first met, or spoke last week, I saw you reading out a bit of flash fiction. Obviously, at this open mic night you were at. Now, you were hinting to hold me off, Mike. This is possibly the direction you're going to be going next, isn't it? So, tell us about then what directions do you going to head in your creativity next? Then,
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I definitely want to I definitely want to improve my flash and short story writing. I had a creative project that I was meant to be doing this year, but unfortunately the press behind it folded. So that one's without a home. But I still want to, I want to do more short stories. I also have another game that I want to write, which is, again, I guess melding all of the influences we've talked about. Beowulf, but set in space. Um,
Oh!
yeah, I
I love
know.
that. I love Beowulf. Oh,
I know, but
yeah,
again, people see it as just like a superhero story, which is great, and it is. But also, there's so much going on under the surface in terms of
yeah.
elegy
Oh,
and
yeah,
longing for a heroic past that doesn't exist anymore. And I think being able to do that in the setting of exploring an abandoned spaceship, you could really do some cool things with that. So
yeah. You
yeah,
definitely can.
that's the next thing
I've
I want
read,
to focus on.
I've read about when I was growing up, several different translations of it, and
Mm,
like the original one, obviously, if you're traveling the original, is very very hard to read,
yeah,
but it's still I think it's worthy of it. And then the
yeah,
various versions I've read it, some have been better than others, but yeah,
yeah.
I do. It's a groundbreaking story.
Didn't Seamus Heaney do a translation?
Some very famous poet did.
Yeah.
I had in my head it was Ted Hughes, but I think it probably
Oh,
probably was.
no, it probably was
No,
Ted Hughes. I think Heaney and Simon Armitage did translations of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight.
yeah, it could have been, couldn't
Yeah,
it? Let,
yeah,
let me
yeah.
just double check that.
Oh, I
I
can't
put
remember now. Isn't
which
that mad?
poet did a translation of Beowulf?
Yeah. I think Tolkien
It
was
was.
quite interested too, wasn't he? Yeah.
Let's have a look. You got me. Is he Seamus Heaney? What's Seamus Heaney?
Ah, there we go.
See,
You.
that's why. So yeah, he did a version of it. I had been with Ted Hughes, but again, like, it doesn't surprise me that one. So yeah, and then
Yeah.
like you've got Howard Howell the Chickling is meant to be a really good version as well.
Oh,
So because
interesting.
he did a dual language edition of it, it probably means the original English with the modern English. That's probably what I was thinking of, to be honest with you. But anyway, good luck with that. Definitely so with that.
Thank
So
you.
keep us informed. Now, obviously, to wrap up with and part one, I will let you do the hard sell now. I love the word hard sell. Where can people get hold of your books in? You talked about.
Okay, so Postcards from Ragnarok you can get on Amazon. I've just got a copy here. Whoop, can you see it?
Ooh,
There we go.
I can indeed. Yeah.
So that was published by a press called Alien Buddha, and they sell everything on Amazon, which is handy. Girl Mirror Wolf can be found on. How are we on swear words? Because the name of the press is Bullshit. It rhymes with lit. Bull something lit. So that is the press
Horrible.
that's published Girl Mirror Wolf, and I really recommend. In fact, yeah, they're going to be sending, because they're based in the States and postage is extortionate. They've actually taken to sending me over patches of books to sort of distribute on. So you can actually tap me up directly if you're UK based for that one.
Might be easier.
And yeah, Salt Ash was released by a Moonlit Cafe press. And it comes as part of a bouquet of 5 little pamphlets. Highly recommend that. They beautifully packaged their lovely little. I know some people who've given them as gifts, and really nice. And then Stovetop Ghosts is, unless you could get the accidental pre-order, it's coming out from an imprint called Femme Salve Press. It's actually an imprint dedicated to writers who have lost previous book deals, because this one went through somewhere else first, and they look after their writers exceptionally well. Really recommend
Sounds
checking out
good.
their stuff.
Sounds
Yeah, it's
good to me.
really, really nice.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so you can get it from there.
Brilliant. Well, what we'll do, wrap up part 1 now then, and
Okay.
we shall be right back, everybody, when Katie's going to do a selection of pieces for us. Looking forward to this. We will see you all in 2 shakes of the dice.